Power doesn't always make noise. Sometimes, it moves quietly, until you realize everything around you has already changed. Velmora City never truly slept. Even at night it moved. Lights flickered across glass towers, traffic flowed like veins through the streets, and somewhere behind closed doors, decisions were made that shaped everything below. It was a city built on quiet control, where influence mattered more than visibility. And in that city, one name carried weight without needing to be spoken loudly. Soren Kuro. He didn't attend events for attention. He didn't raise his voice to be heard. He didn't repeat himself. People adjusted when he walked into a room. Not out of fear alone, but because they understood what he represented. Control. Precision. Final decisions. Soren stood near the wide glass windows of a private floor inside one of Velmora's most exclusive buildings. The city stretched beneath him, glowing and distant. From up here, everything looked calm. That was the illusion. Behind him, the room was already prepared. Clean. Minimal. Controlled. Nothing unnecessary. Just like everything he preferred. Tonight wasn't about celebration. It was about alignment. A contract had already been signed. Agreements made. Routes secured. Access granted. The kind of arrangement that strengthened networks and removed future problems before they started. The marriage was simply the final step. Soren adjusted the sleeve of his black suit, his movements slow and deliberate. There was no hesitation in him. No doubt. This was a decision like any other, calculated, necessary, efficient. The woman he was about to marry? A detail in the agreement. Nothing more. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. The ceremony was small. No unnecessary crowd. No distractions. Only a handful of people stood in the room, each one there for a reason. No one spoke loudly. No one lingered too long on anything. Everything moved forward exactly as planned. Soren's attention shifted the moment she entered. Ilaris Vane. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate either. She simply walked in. Her dress was simple, elegant without trying too hard. Nothing about her demanded attention, and yet, the room seemed to notice her anyway. Not because of what she wore, but because of how she moved. Most people in that room avoided eye contact with Soren. Some out of respect, others out of caution. Ilaris did neither. She looked. Not directly. Not challengingly. But she noticed. Her gaze moved slowly, across the room, across the people, across the space itself. Like she was memorizing it. That was the first thing that felt off. Soren watched her carefully, his expression unchanged. She didn't look nervous. No trembling hands. No shallow breathing. No forced smiles. Nothing. She simply stood there, calm in a way that didn't match the situation. The ceremony began. Words were spoken. Formal, expected, routine. Soren responded when required. His voice steady, unaffected. When it was her turn, there was a brief pause. Not long enough to draw attention, but long enough for him to notice. "I do," she said quietly. Not emotional. Not hesitant. Just neutral. The moment passed. The officiant continued. The room followed. Everything moved forward as it was meant to. And yet, something didn't sit right. When it was time for the final step, the moment that usually meant something to people, Soren stepped closer. He didn't rush it. He never rushed anything. But as he leaned in slightly, Ilaris turned her face. Not dramatically. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough. His lips brushed past her cheek instead. It was subtle. Most people in the room didn't react. But Soren noticed. Of course he did. The ceremony ended. Quiet congratulations followed. Short conversations. Controlled smiles. Nothing lingered. Ilaris didn't stay surrounded by people. She stepped away. Not in a hurry. Not trying to escape. Just moving with purpose. Again that same pattern. Not reacting. Observing. By the time they arrived at the penthouse, the city had deepened into night. Velmora looked different from above at that hour. Less like a system, more like something alive. Lights pulsing. Movement constant. Ilaris stepped inside first. She didn't ask questions. Didn't comment on the space. Didn't explore. She walked forward slowly, and stopped near the glass wall overlooking the city. Soren entered behind her, closing the door quietly. He watched. She didn't turn around. Didn't speak. She just stood there. Looking out. But not in the way most people did. Not admiring. Not distracted. Focused. Like she was tracking something beyond the lights. Minutes passed. Silence settled in the room. Soren removed his jacket, placing it neatly over the back of a chair. His movements remained controlled, deliberate. Still she didn't move. Didn't sit. Didn't even glance around the space. That was unusual. Most people, when placed somewhere unfamiliar, especially somewhere like this, showed something. Curiosity. Discomfort. Impression. Alaris showed none of it. "You can sit," Soren said finally. His voice was calm. Not demanding. Just stating a simple option. She shook her head slightly. "I'm fine here." Her tone was quiet. Steady. No tension. No effort. Just simple. Soren studied her for a moment, then asked, "You don't want to see the rest of the place?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze shifted slightly, just enough to take in the reflection of the room behind her in the glass. "I've seen enough," she said. That answer didn't match the question. Another pause. Then, without looking at him, she added, "I prefer to see exits." That made him still. Not visibly, but internally. That wasn't fear. That wasn't uncertainty. That was awareness. Soren had spent years reading people. It was part of how he built everything he controlled. Fear was easy to recognize. So was confidence. So was deception. But this didn't fall into any of those. Alaris wasn't reacting to her environment. She was analyzing it. And that changed everything. Because people who analyzed instead of reacted were never simple. Soren's gaze narrowed slightly, just enough to sharpen his focus. He watched her again. The stillness. The control. The quiet awareness in the way she stood. This wasn't someone overwhelmed by her situation. This wasn't someone trying to adjust. This was someone already adapting. Too quickly. Too naturally. And for the first time that night, Soren Kuro felt something unfamiliar settle into his thoughts. Not doubt. Not concern. Something sharper. Recognition. Because now the situation looked different. The marriage wasn't the problem. The agreement wasn't the issue. The problem was the person standing in front of him. Soren exhaled slowly, his voice low but clear. "You're not reacting to any of this." This time she turned slightly. Just enough for him to see her expression. Calm. Unreadable. "No," she said. A brief pause. Then, "I'm paying attention." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty anymore. And in that moment, Soren understood something he hadn't expected to realize on the first night. She wasn't reacting. She was studying. Fear is loud when it wants to be seen, but the most dangerous kind is the one that stays quiet. The city looked different at night. From the height of the penthouse, Velmora stretched endlessly, lights scattered across the skyline like something carefully arranged. Movement below never stopped, but from above, it all seemed distant. Controlled. Predictable. Inside it was quiet. Too quiet. The door had closed minutes ago, but the silence still felt new, like something waiting to settle into place. Soren stepped further into the room, his pace unhurried. He had already removed his jacket, placing it exactly where it belonged. Everything in the space had a position. Everything had a purpose. Except this. Except her. Alaris stood by the window. She hadn't moved since they arrived. Not toward the seating area. Not toward the hallway. Not even a step deeper into the room. She remained near the glass, her gaze fixed on the city below. But she wasn't looking at it the way most people did. She wasn't distracted by it. She wasn't impressed. She was watching. Soren noticed that immediately. Most people, when placed somewhere unfamiliar, especially somewhere like this, showed something. Curiosity. Uncertainty. Even admiration. Alaris showed none of it. She stood still, her posture relaxed but not careless. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her shoulders steady. No tension. No nervous movement. No sign of fear. That alone didn't make sense. Soren moved closer, stopping a few steps behind her. Not too close. Not distant either. Just enough to observe without interrupting. "You've been standing there for a while," he said. His voice was calm. Measured. She didn't turn immediately. "I know," she replied. Her tone matched his, quiet, controlled, without effort. That was another thing. People usually adjusted their tone around him. They either became too careful, or too eager. She did neither. Soren's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained composed. "You can sit," he said. A simple statement. An invitation, not an order. Alaris shook her head gently. "I'm fine." Still not turning. Still not moving. Soren studied her for a moment, then shifted his attention briefly to the room around them. Everything remained exactly as it should be. Perfect. And yet, something about this situation felt unbalanced. He looked back at her. "You're not tired?" This time she turned slightly. Not fully. Just enough for him to see part of her profile. "I don't think that's the problem," she said. That answer didn't match the question. Soren noticed. Of course he did. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, but deliberate. Then he asked, "What is the problem?" For a moment she didn't respond. Her gaze moved again, not out the window this time but across the reflection in the glass. The room behind them. The layout. The distance between objects. Taking everything in. Then she said, "Nothing." But it didn't sound like nothing. It sounded like a choice. Soren exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance slightly. He had dealt with negotiations far more complex than this. Situations where every word mattered. Where silence carried meaning. This felt similar. Except it wasn't supposed to. This wasn't a negotiation. It was supposed to be simple. And yet it wasn't. Sometimes, it's not what a person says that reveals them. It's what they choose not to show. Soren stepped closer, not enough to invade her space but enough to change the distance between them. "You're not asking any questions," he said. She looked at him now. Directly. For the first time since they entered. "I don't need to." Again that answer. Come. Certain. Final. "Most people would," Soren replied. She held his gaze for a moment, then said, "Most people don't have the same situation." That was true. But it wasn't complete. Soren tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. Still nothing obvious. No fear. No resistance. Just awareness. "You're adapting quickly," he said. Ilaris blinked once, almost thoughtfully. "I don't think this is something you adapt to," she replied. Another pause. Then quietly, "I think you just decide how you're going to exist in it." That made him still. Not visibly, but internally. Because that wasn't something someone overwhelmed would say. That was something someone prepared would say. Soren shifted his focus again, this time more carefully. He watched her hands. Still steady. He watched her posture. Balanced. He watched her breathing. Even. No signs of stress. No hesitation. Nothing that suggested uncertainty. That didn't mean she wasn't feeling anything. It meant she wasn't showing it. And that was more interesting. "You've been looking at the window this entire time," he said. She followed his gaze briefly, then looked back at him. "Yes." "Why?" A simple question. But this time she didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved again, slightly to the side then back to him. Measuring. Choosing. Then she said, "It's the only place in the room where I can see everything at once." Soren frowned slightly. "Everything?" She nodded. "The reflection shows the whole space. The doors. The layout. Movement." That explained it. But it also raised more questions. "You're watching the room?" he said. "Yes." "Why?" This time she didn't hesitate. "I prefer to know where I am." That wasn't unusual. But the way she said it made it different. Soren crossed his arms loosely, his attention sharpening. "And what does that tell you?" he asked. Ilaris looked at him for a moment, then answered, "That this place is designed for control." He didn't respond. Because she wasn't wrong. "And," he asked. She glanced back at the window then said, "And that there are limited exits." There it was again. That word. Exits. Soren's gaze darkened slightly, not with anger but with focus. "You're thinking about leaving?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." Another pause. Then, "I just like knowing the option exists." Control isn't always about holding power. Sometimes it's about knowing where it ends. The silence that followed felt different now. Not empty. Not neutral. Waited. Soren studied her again, this time more carefully than before. Everything about her behavior pointed to one thing. Not fear. Not submission. Awareness. Calculated awareness. And that didn't fit the situation. Not the way it should. He took a slow step forward. Close enough now that distance wasn't an excuse. "You're not acting like someone in your position," he said. She didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't tense. She simply looked at him. "What position is that?" she asked. Soren held her gaze. "A person who just walked into something they didn't choose." Ilaris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That depends on how you define choice." That answer lingered. Because it wasn't denial. It wasn't agreement either. It was something in between. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. Now the situation had shifted. He wasn't observing a reaction anymore. He was observing intent. And intent meant something else entirely. He spoke again, his tone lower now. More direct. You're not afraid of me, are you? The question settled into the room. Clear. Unavoidable. Alaris didn't look away. Didn't hesitate. Didn't soften. She answered exactly the same way she had spoken all night. Calm. Controlled. Certain. No, she said. A brief pause. Then. I'm just careful. The quiet ones are rarely empty. They're usually paying attention to everything everyone else ignores. The first morning came without announcement. No alarms. No conversation. No sudden shift. Just light. Soft daylight slipping through the tall glass windows, spreading slowly across the floor of the penthouse. Velmora was already moving again. Cars below, distant motion, the quiet rhythm of a city that never paused. Inside everything remained still. Soren was already awake. He didn't sleep heavily. He never had. Years of routine had trained his body to rest without losing awareness. Even now, his mind had already settled into observation before he moved. The first thing he noticed was the space. Unchanged. Exactly as it had been the night before. The second thing he noticed was her. Alaris stood near the same place by the window. Not in the exact same position, but close enough to matter. She wasn't dressed for sleep anymore. She wasn't unsettled either. She simply stood there again looking out, not distracted, not idle. Focused. Soren watched her for a moment before saying anything. You didn't sleep? She didn't turn. I did. Her answer was immediate. Come. How long? He asked. A few hours. Still no movement. That wasn't unusual on its own. But everything about her felt consistent. Too consistent. Breakfast arrived shortly after. Quietly delivered. Placed neatly on the table. No interruptions. Soren sat first. He didn't call her over. He simply waited. After a moment, Alaris walked toward the table. Slow. Measured. She took a seat across from him. Not too close. Not distant either. Balanced. That word kept returning. Everything about her was balanced. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Soren began eating, his movements controlled and unhurried. He didn't rush meals. He didn't waste time either. Alaris didn't reach for anything. Not immediately. She sat there, her gaze shifting slightly across the table, not staring at him, not avoiding him. Observing. Then, after a moment, she picked up a glass of water. But even that was different. She didn't just take it. She paused briefly. A small hesitation. Not enough for most people to notice. But Soren did. She was thinking before she touched it. Then she drank. Slowly. Carefully. You're cautious, Soren said. She looked at him. About certain things. Her tone remained neutral. What things? He asked. She glanced briefly at the glass, then back at him. Anything unfamiliar. That answer was simple. But it carried weight. Soren leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her again. You're in an unfamiliar place, he said. Yes. But you don't seem uncomfortable. Alaris considered that for a moment. I didn't say I was comfortable. That was fair. But again, it wasn't the full answer. They returned to silence. Not forced. Not tense. Just present. Soren continued eating. Alaris didn't. She hadn't touched the food. Not even once. Are you not hungry? He asked. She shook her head lightly. I am. Then eat. She looked at the table. Then back at him. I will. But she didn't. Not yet. Soren didn't push further. He didn't need to. He had already started understanding something. Alaris didn't react immediately to anything. She delayed. She processed. Then she acted. That alone set her apart from most people. Later that morning, Soren moved through the penthouse as he normally would. Checking nothing. But noticing everything. It was routine. Except now. There was another variable. Alaris walked through the space slowly. Not aimlessly. Deliberately. She moved from one area to another, not touching objects, not interacting with anything directly. Just observing. Her eyes moved across surfaces, corners, distances. She paused near the hallway. Looked toward the door. Then toward the secondary entrance. Then back again. Mapping it. Soren watched from a distance. Unseen. Or at least unnoticed. That's what he assumed. She stopped near a wall panel. Not touching it. Just looking. Then she moved on. By midday the pattern became clearer. She wasn't exploring. She was learning. Some people walk into a new place and try to belong, others walk in and try to understand it first. Soren stepped into the main living area again, his presence quiet but known. Ilaris turned slightly as he approached. "You've been walking through the same areas?" he said. "Yes." "Why?" She didn't hesitate. "To remember them." "That's not difficult," he replied. She shook her head lightly. "It is, if you're paying attention to more than just where things are." Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. "And what else are you paying attention to?" Ilaris met his gaze. "Distance. Timing. Patterns." That answer settled into the room. It wasn't casual. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. "You speak like someone trained to notice things," Soren said. Ilaris looked away briefly, then back at him. "Everyone notices things. Not like this." A small pause. Then she said, "Most people choose not to." That response stayed with him longer than it should have. Later that afternoon, two members of Soren's security team stood near the entrance of the private floor. They didn't move much. They didn't speak unless necessary. But they saw everything. One of them glanced toward the hallway as Ilaris passed by again. "Has she been doing that all day?" he asked quietly. The other nodded. "She hasn't touched anything." The first one frowned slightly. "That's strange." "Not just that," the second added. "She notices positions." "Positions?" "Where we stand. When we shift. How often we move." The first one went silent for a moment, then said, "She's counting." Inside, Ilaris paused again near the window. Different angle this time. Different position. Same focus. Soren stepped into the room again, his attention sharper now. "You're making my security uncomfortable," he said. She turned slightly. "I didn't realize they were watching me that closely." "They're not the only ones," he replied. That earned a faint reaction. Not fear. Not surprise. Just acknowledgement. Ilaris folded her arms lightly, her posture still relaxed. "They're observant," she said. "They're trained to be." She nodded. "So am I." That was the first time she said something that direct. And it changed the tone immediately. Soren took a slow step closer. Not aggressive. Not distant. Measured. "Trained for what?" he asked. Ilaris didn't answer right away. Her eyes shifted briefly, to the window, to the hallway, then back to him. Then she said, "To understand where I am." That wasn't enough. And they both knew it. The silence that followed carried more weight than before. Because now, there was no question anymore. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't personality. This wasn't someone adjusting slowly to a new situation. This was someone already operating within it. Soren studied her one more time, more carefully than he had before. Every movement. Every pause. Every word. And the conclusion came to him clearly. Not as a guess. Not as a possibility. But as fact. She wasn't just adapting. She was adapting too fast. The truth doesn't always hide. Sometimes, it simply doesn't exist where it should. Soren didn't act immediately. He never did. Impulsive decisions created problems. Careful ones removed them before they had time to grow. So instead of confronting anything directly, he did what he always did when something felt off. He observed. For the rest of the day, nothing about Ilaris changed. She moved through the penthouse with the same quiet awareness. She spoke only when necessary. She touched very little. Even when she did, it felt intentional, like every action had already been considered before it happened. That consistency was the problem. People adjusted over time. They became more comfortable, more careless, more predictable. Ilaris didn't. She stayed exactly the same. And that meant one thing. Whatever she was doing, it wasn't new to her. That thought stayed with him long after she stepped out of the room. Soren reached for his phone, his expression calm, his movements controlled. There was no urgency in him, but his focus had sharpened. He made a call. It was answered on the second ring. "I need everything on Ilaris Vane," he said. No greeting. No explanation. There didn't need to be one. A short pause followed on the other end. "Everything?" the voice asked. Soren's gaze shifted briefly toward the hallway. "Everything," he repeated. The call ended. The first report came within an hour. Too quickly. That was the first sign. Soren sat in the same place, reviewing the information as it appeared on his screen. His expression didn't change, but his attention narrowed. Basic records were there. Name. Background. Clean. Too clean. No irregularities. No gaps. No issues. That alone was unusual. Everyone had something. A mistake. A delay. A record that didn't align perfectly. Alaris didn't. It looked complete. Perfectly complete. Soren leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against the side of the device. "Run it again," he said into the phone. A short pause. "It's already verified. Run it again." This time there was no hesitation. The second report took longer. Not much, but enough. When it arrived, the difference was subtle. Not in what was there, but in what wasn't. Soren read through it slowly, carefully, line by line. Everything matched the first report. Except, it didn't. There were no contradictions, no obvious errors. But something felt incomplete. Like a story that had been told correctly, but without detail. He made another call. "Contact the institutions listed in her records," he said. "Directly?" "Yes." "Understood." The responses came in gradually. And that's where the problem began. The first institution confirmed her name. "Yes, we have that record." But when asked for details, there was nothing more to give. No memory. No additional information. Just confirmation. The second place gave a similar response. "Yes, that name exists in our system." But again, no detail. No recognition. By the third response, the pattern was clear. Every place confirmed her existence. But no one seemed to know her. Soren placed the phone down slowly, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. That didn't happen. Records could be incomplete. People could forget. But not like this. Not across everything. He stood and walked toward the window, his reflection faint against the glass. The city below continued as usual. Unaware. Unchanged. But the situation had shifted. There were only a few explanations for something like this. None of them simple. Either the information had been altered, or it had been created. Soren exhaled slowly, his mind already moving ahead. If her background had been constructed, it meant planning, time, resources, and intention. That raised a more important question. What? He turned away from the window, his focus returning to the present. Alaris was still in the penthouse, still moving the same way, still watching everything. Had she expected this? The thought didn't feel unlikely. Soren picked up his phone again. "Who handled the agreement?" he asked. A different voice this time. "The negotiation?" "Yes." "A third-party intermediary." "Name?" There was a pause. Then, "We don't have one." Soren's expression remained calm, but something sharpened beneath it. "You completed an agreement without a name?" "It was verified through channels." "Whose channels?" Another pause. Longer this time. "External." That wasn't an answer. Soren ended the call without another word. Now the situation had changed again. This wasn't just about her background anymore. This was about the agreement itself. He moved back into the main space of the penthouse, his steps quiet, controlled. Everything looked the same. Nothing out of place. But now it didn't feel the same. Because now there was a question that hadn't existed before. Had this been arranged? Or orchestrated? Soren stopped near the center of the room, his gaze shifting briefly toward the hallway where Alaris had last been seen. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't reacted. She hadn't shown uncertainty. And now her past didn't hold together. That wasn't coincidence. That was design. The realization settled slowly but firmly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just clear. He had entered this arrangement believing he understood it. Every detail. Every outcome. Every risk. But now, there was a gap. A missing piece. And that piece was standing inside his space. Soren's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked toward the hallway again. The woman he married was not who she was supposed to be. And that left only one question. Who exactly did I just marry? Sometimes the danger isn't inside the room, it's already outside, waiting. The signal came in quietly. No alarms. No sudden interruption. Just a message, short, precise, and sent through a channel that didn't allow mistakes. Soren read it once. Then again. External surveillance detected. His expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened immediately. Messages like that were never casual. They weren't guesses. They were confirmations. Someone had been watching. He stood still for a moment, thinking. Not reacting. Not rushing. Just placing the information where it belonged. Then he moved. By the time he stepped out into the main area, 2 members of his security team were already waiting. They didn't look tense, but their posture had shifted slightly, alert, ready. Where? Soren asked. Perimeter first, one of them replied. Then movement across adjacent buildings. Patterns? Not random. That was enough. Soren's gaze moved briefly toward the glass walls of the penthouse. The city outside looked the same as always, busy, distant, unaware. But now it meant something different. Inside, he asked. The second guard shook his head. No breach. Good, Soren said quietly. That meant whoever it was, they were careful. Watching, not acting. Yet. The room returned to silence once the guard stepped back, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It carried weight now. Awareness. Direction. Soren didn't move immediately. He stood there thinking through the possibilities. Random surveillance didn't exist at this level. Not here. Not like this. This was intentional. Focused. And that meant one thing. The target mattered. His attention shifted toward the hallway. Alaris. She stepped into the room moments later, her pace steady, her expression unchanged. If she had noticed anything different, she didn't show it. That was becoming familiar. Soren watched her carefully. Come here, he said. His voice wasn't sharp, but it wasn't casual either. She approached without hesitation, stopping at a comfortable distance. Not too close. Not far. Balanced. You need to stay inside for now, he said. She looked at him, calm as always. Why? No panic. No urgency. Just a question. There's been movement outside, he replied. Unidentified surveillance. Alaris didn't react the way most people would. She didn't stiffen. Didn't step back. Didn't ask what that meant. She simply absorbed the information. Then nodded once. All right. That was it. Soren studied her more closely. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. And you're not concerned? She tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question rather than reacting to it. I didn't say that. Then what are you? He asked. She met his gaze directly. Aware. That word again. Always controlled. Always precise. Soren took a slow step closer. Someone is watching this place, he said. Watching you. That should have changed something. It didn't? Alaris remained still, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. How long? She asked. That made him pause. Not the question itself, but the way she asked it. Not who. Not why. How long? We're still determining that, Soren replied. She nodded slightly, her eyes shifting for just a second toward the windows. Thinking. Calculating. Then she asked, did they get inside access? No. Then they're observing patterns. Soren didn't answer immediately, because she was right. Some people hear danger and panic. Others hear it and start thinking. He watched her more carefully now. Every word she chose. Every reaction she didn't show. You seem familiar with this, he said. Alaris looked back at him. I'm familiar with being watched. That response settled into the space between them. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't revealing either. Just honest enough to matter. Soren crossed his arms loosely, his attention sharpening. Why? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze shifted slightly, toward the hallway then back to him. Measuring something. Then she said, because it's not new. That was all. No explanation. No detail. The room felt different again. More focused. More controlled. But now there was something else beneath it. A shift. Soren stepped closer, closing the distance just slightly. Who would be watching you? He asked. Alaris held his gaze. I don't know. He didn't believe that. Not completely. You don't have any idea? He pressed. She paused. Just briefly. Then said, there are possibilities. Name one. Silence. Not long. But deliberate. Then. No. That answer was clear. She wasn't going to give him everything. Not yet. Soren studied her for a moment, then turned slightly, his attention shifting back toward the city outside. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Because now there was confirmation. This situation extended beyond the walls. Behind him, Alaris spoke again. If they're watching from outside, they're waiting. Soren glanced back at her. For what? She didn't hesitate. For something to change. That matched his thinking. Too closely. You're not surprised, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. I didn't expect it this soon, she replied. That was new. That mattered. Soren's expression remained calm, but his focus locked onto her completely now. This soon? He repeated. Ilaris exhaled lightly, her posture still relaxed. Then she said something that shifted everything. They were watching me before I got here. Silence followed. Not empty. Not uncertain. Just clear. Soren didn't move. Didn't react outwardly. But internally, everything aligned at once. The surveillance. Her behavior. The inconsistencies in her background. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This had started long before the agreement. Long before the marriage. And now it had followed her here. Soren's gaze remained fixed on her, his voice lower now, more focused. Then this isn't about the penthouse. Ilaris shook her head slightly. No. Another pause. Then she added, quietly but clearly. They were watching me before I met you. Truth doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes, it comes in pieces you have to decide whether to trust. Soren didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was already quiet enough for every word to matter. Ilaris stood across from him, her posture steady, her expression calm in the same way it had been since the beginning. Nothing about her suggested panic. Nothing suggested urgency. But something had shifted. Not in her movements. In what she had said. Soren took a step closer, slow and controlled. You knew, he said. It wasn't a question. Ilaris didn't look away. Yes. That answer came without hesitation. No attempt to soften it. No effort to avoid it. Just a simple confirmation. Soren studied her face, searching for something. Uncertainty, doubt, even regret. There was none. You knew you were being watched, he continued. Yes. And you still walked into this? Another pause. Not long. Just enough to show that she was choosing her words. Yes. That settled deeper than anything else she had said. Because it removed any possibility that this was accidental. Soren exhaled slowly, his gaze sharpening. That doesn't make sense, he said. Ilaris tilted her head slightly, not in confusion but in consideration. It does, she replied, if you understand the reason. Then explain it, Soren said. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it was direct. Ilaris didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved briefly, not avoiding him but thinking. Measuring how much to say. Then she looked back at him. I can't explain all of it, she said. That wasn't refusal. It was limitation. Soren didn't react outwardly but his focus tightened. Why not? Because it doesn't only involve me. That answer added something new. Something larger. Soren crossed his arms slightly, his posture still relaxed but more attentive. So this is bigger than you, he said. Ilaris didn't deny it. Yes. That single word carried weight. It meant there were other people. Other factors. Other intentions. And none of them had been part of the agreement he thought he understood. Soren took another step, closing the distance just slightly. You walked into a controlled environment, he said. Into a situation you knew would limit your movement, your options, your visibility. Ilaris listened without interrupting. And you did that knowing someone was already watching you, he added. Yes. Why? This time she didn't answer right away. Her gaze shifted briefly to the side then back to him. There was something different now. Not fear. Not hesitation. Something closer to calculation. Because it changed the position, she said. Soren frowned slightly. What position? Mine. The answer was quiet but clear. Soren studied her carefully. You chose this, he said. It wasn't a question. Ilaris met his eyes. Yes. That word didn't come with explanation. But it didn't need one. It confirmed everything. Soren's expression remained controlled, but internally the situation shifted again. This wasn't someone caught in something beyond their control. This was someone who had stepped into it. On purpose. Then the agreement, he started. It still matters, she said. She didn't let him finish. That alone said something. You needed it, she continued. And I needed something else. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. And what is that? Ilaris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, position. That word again. Consistent. Intentional. Soren let the silence settle for a moment. Then he asked, you used this. Ilaris didn't react to the wording. I made a decision, she replied. That benefited you, he said. Yes. And possibly complicated everything for me. Another pause. Then, yes. There was no apology in it. No attempt to soften the truth. Just acknowledgement. That honesty made the situation clearer. But not easier. Soren walked a few steps away, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window before returning to her. Trust required clarity. And right now clarity was incomplete. You're telling me enough to confirm something's wrong, he said, but not enough to understand it. Ilaris nodded slightly. That's accurate. Soren looked at her again, his expression unreadable. And you expect me to accept that? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I expect you to decide what matters more. What does that mean? Control, she replied. Or understanding. That answer lingered, because it forced a choice. Soren remained still for a moment, then asked quietly, and if I choose control? Ilaris didn't hesitate. Then you'll try to contain something you don't fully see. That wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Simple. Direct. Soren studied her one last time, more carefully than before. Everything about her pointed to one thing. She wasn't lying. But she wasn't revealing everything either. And that space between truth and silence was where the real problem existed. The room fell quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. This one carried weight. Decision. Uncertainty. Soren's voice lowered slightly. You walked into this knowing all of this, he said. Ilaris held his gaze. Yes. A brief pause. Then she added, calmly, I didn't come here by accident. Power doesn't always shift in loud moments. Sometimes, it changes in silence, one decision at a time. The change didn't happen all at once. There was no clear moment where everything felt different. No single conversation that defined it. It moved slowly, almost unnoticed at first. But it was there. Soren saw it in the way Ilaris no longer stayed near the window all the time. She still observed, still paid attention, but she moved through the space more freely now. Not like someone adjusting, but like someone who had already understood enough. And more importantly, she started speaking. Not often. Not unnecessarily. But when she did, it wasn't just to respond. It was to add something. That was new. One morning they sat across from each other again at the table. The same setting. The same quiet. But the silence felt different. Less distant. Soren placed a document on the table, his attention focused on it. Ilaris glanced at it briefly. You read everything? She asked. Soren didn't look up. Yes. Twice. Now he looked at her. Yes. She nodded slightly. Good. That was all. No explanation. But it wasn't empty either. Later that day, she stood near the main living area while Soren spoke on the phone. She wasn't trying to listen, but she didn't leave either. When he ended the call, she asked, That was about the surveillance? Soren studied her for a moment. Yes. She nodded. Then they're still watching. It wasn't a question. Soren didn't answer immediately. They haven't stopped, he said. Ilaris looked toward the window briefly, then back at him. They won't. That certainty didn't feel like assumption. It felt like understanding. The distance between them had changed. Not physically, but in the way they interacted. Soren no longer treated her like something temporary. Something to be managed. He didn't dismiss her presence. Didn't ignore her observations. He listened. Carefully. Even when he didn't respond. That evening the room was quiet again. No conversations. No movement. Just presence. Soren sat near the window, reviewing information on his phone. Ilaris stood a few steps away. Neither of them spoke. But the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. Not every connection is built through words. Sometimes, it's built through understanding when nothing needs to be said. After a while, Ilaris moved toward the seating area and sat down. That alone was different. Before, she would have remained standing, watching. Now she allowed herself to settle. Not fully relaxed, but no longer distant. Soren noticed. Of course he did. You're getting used to this place, he said. She looked at him. No, she replied. A brief pause. I'm getting used to how it works. That answer was more honest than anything else. Soren leaned back slightly, considering it. And what do you think? He asked. Ilaris glanced around the room, then back at him. It's controlled, she said. That's the point. Yes. Another pause. But control depends on knowing what you're controlling. Soren's eyes narrowed slightly. And you think I don't? Ilaris didn't challenge him. She simply said, I think you're learning something new. That wasn't criticism. It was observation. Soren didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't wrong. Later they stood near the window again. This time side by side. Not facing each other. Not avoiding each other. Just there. looking out over the city. Velmora looks different from up here, Ilaris said. It always does, Soren replied. She nodded slightly. People think they understand things when they see them from a distance. Soren glanced at her. And do they? No, she said. They just think they do. That quiet exchange stayed between them. Not dramatic. Not important on the surface. But it shifted something. Soren began noticing the small changes more clearly. She no longer hesitated before picking something up. She no longer paused as long before responding. She moved with the same awareness, but with less distance. And in return, he adjusted too. He stopped watching her like a problem to solve. Stopped measuring every action like it needed to be explained. Instead, he observed differently. Not for flaws, but for understanding. One afternoon, he handed her a piece of information. No explanation, just the document. She took it, read it carefully, then looked at him. This matters, she said. Yes. Then you're going to act on it. Yes. A brief pause. Then she added, good. That was it. But it was enough. Trust didn't appear. It built, slowly, through moments like that. Soren stood alone later that night, his thoughts quieter than usual. Everything had changed. Not dramatically, but clearly. Ilaris was no longer just part of the situation. She wasn't something uncertain. Something temporary. Something to manage. She had become something else. Soren looked toward the hallway where she had gone moments earlier, his expression calm but focused. And for the first time since this began, the conclusion came without resistance. She wasn't a liability. She was an advantage. The past doesn't always stay behind you. Sometimes, it waits until you're still enough to catch up. The shift came without warning. No loud signal. No visible change in the city. Everything outside still looked the same, controlled, distant, predictable. But inside the network Soren operated in, something had moved. The message reached him early. Not through the usual channels, but through a restricted line that was only used when information needed to be delivered without delay. He read it once. Then again. This time there was no question. The situation had escalated. Soren stood near the center of the room, his phone still in his hand, his expression unchanged. But his focus had sharpened into something more precise. Movement had been confirmed. Not random. Not passive. Deliberate. Someone wasn't just watching anymore. They were positioning. Ilaris entered the room quietly, her steps measured, her posture calm as always. But the moment she saw him, she paused. Not because she was unsure. Because she understood. Something changed, she said. Soren looked at her. Yes. She didn't ask what. She waited. They're moving closer, he said. Ilaris absorbed that without visible reaction. How close, she asked. Close enough to stop observing. That was the difference. Observation could be ignored. Movement couldn't. Ilaris walked further into the room, her gaze briefly shifting toward the windows before returning to him. They've been waiting for that, she said. For what? For a reason to act. Soren watched her carefully. And now they have one? Ilaris met his eyes. Yes. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was focused. Because now the situation wasn't theoretical anymore. It was active. Soren turned slightly, his attention shifting toward the city beyond the glass. Everything still moved the same way. But now it meant something else. They're not here for the space, he said. Ilaris didn't respond immediately. Then she said, no. That answer confirmed what he had already begun to understand. This wasn't about control of territory. It wasn't about access. It wasn't about business. It was targeted. Soren looked back at her. Then they're here for you. Ilaris didn't deny it. Yes. That word settled into the room with weight. Clear. Final. Soren moved a step closer, his posture still controlled but his presence sharper now. Why? He asked. Ilaris exhaled quietly, her gaze lowering for just a moment before returning to him. They don't trust what I know. That wasn't the full answer. But it was enough. What do you know? Soren asked. Ilaris didn't respond immediately. Her eyes shifted slightly, not avoiding him but thinking. Choosing. Then she said, enough to matter. That answer didn't simplify anything. But it clarified one thing. She was central. Not accidental. Not secondary. Soren's mind moved quickly now, aligning everything. The surveillance. The inconsistencies. Her awareness. This had always been connected. He walked past her toward the hallway, then stopped, turning back slightly. They're expecting a reaction, he said. Ilaris nodded. Yes. Then they won't get the one they want. That decision came easily. But the way he approached it would be different now. Before, he would have moved aggressively, closed the space, forced the situation into clarity. Now, he paused, considered, adjusted. Ilaris watched him carefully. You're not going to move immediately, she said. It wasn't a question. Soren looked at her. No. She nodded slightly. That's better. That small exchange carried more weight than it should have, because it showed something clear. He wasn't acting alone anymore. The room grew quiet again, but it wasn't still. It was active in a different way. Both of them thinking. Both of them adjusting. Soren stepped closer again, his voice lower now. If they're moving, they'll try to force something, he said. Yes. Then we decide when that happens. Ilaris held his gaze. Yes. There was no hesitation between them. No confusion. Just alignment. That was new. Soren turned his attention back to the window, his reflection faint against the glass. Everything had changed. Not just the situation. The way he approached it. Because now the focus wasn't on control. It was on precision. Timing. Understanding. Behind him, Ilaris spoke again. They won't stop, she said. Soren didn't turn. I know. They'll keep adjusting. So will we. That answer settled firmly. Not as a reaction, but as a decision. Soren remained still for a moment longer, his thoughts clear now in a way they hadn't been before. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Not a guess. Not a possibility. A fact. This wasn't about territory. It was about her. The room was quiet again. Not the same quiet from before. This one carried weight. Not tension. Not uncertainty. Something deeper. Something that had been building slowly, piece by piece. Soren stood near the table, a thin folder in his hand. He hadn't opened it again since it was brought in. He didn't need to. He already knew what was inside. Across the room, Ilaris stood by the window. Not watching the city the way she used to. Not tracking movement. Not studying reflections. Just standing. Present. That alone said something had changed. Soren walked toward her, his steps steady, controlled as always. He stopped a short distance away, not close enough to interrupt her space, but not distant either. Look at me, he said. His voice was calm. Not commanding. She turned. Slowly. Her expression was the same, quiet, unreadable, but there was something different beneath it now. Something less guarded. Soren held her gaze for a moment, then extended the folder toward her. Take it. She looked at it briefly before reaching for it. No hesitation. Her fingers closed around it and she opened it without asking. Inside were documents. Simple. Clear. Final. Her eyes moved across the pages, taking in every detail. No rushing. No visible reaction. But Soren watched closely. He didn't miss anything. You're free to leave, he said. The words settled into the room. They didn't echo. They didn't need to. Ilaris didn't look up immediately. Her eyes remained on the pages, finishing what she had already started. Then she closed the folder. Slowly. Carefully. And finally she looked at him. You're ending it, she said. Not a question. A statement. Yes. That answer was just as steady. No explanation added. No justification. Just the truth. Ilaris held his gaze, her expression calm, but her thoughts moving behind it. Why? She asked. Soren didn't answer right away. He rarely did. When he spoke, it was because the words mattered. Because this was never supposed to involve you like this, he said. She didn't respond. So he continued. You walked into something that had already started before you arrived. That makes you a variable I didn't account for. Ilaris listened. Carefully. And now? She asked. Soren's eyes didn't leave hers. Now I am. That was the difference. Before, everything had been controlled. Planned. Now it had changed. Because she had changed it. Ilaris glanced down at the folder in her hand, her fingers resting lightly against the edge. This removes the agreement, she said. Yes. And everything attached to it. Yes. Another pause. Then she asked, including me? Soren's expression didn't shift. Yes. That word carried weight. More than anything else he had said. Ilaris looked at him for a long moment. Not searching. Not questioning. Understanding. You're giving me a way out, she said. Yes. Completely. Yes. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but full. Because now there was nothing left to hide behind. No arrangement. No structure. No expectation. Just a choice. Freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes, it arrives quietly and waits for you to decide what to do with it. Ilaris turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window again. The city looked the same. Lights, movement, distance. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Not to her. Not now. Her grip on the folder tightened slightly, then relaxed. She thought about everything. Not in pieces, but as a whole. The moment she walked in. The way she had watched everything. The way he had noticed. The way things had shifted slowly without force. He hadn't tried to control her. Not completely. Not in the way she expected. That mattered. More than she had planned for. Soren remained still, watching her without interrupting. He wasn't waiting for a specific answer. He wasn't forcing anything. That too was different. Ilaris turned back to him. Her expression hadn't changed much. But something behind it had. Something clearer. You think I'll leave, she said. Soren didn't respond. He didn't need to. She understood. She stepped closer. Not quickly. Not cautiously. Just, intentionally. The folder remained in her hand. Unopened again. And used. You removed the pressure, she said. Yes. You removed the reason I had to stay. Yes. Another pause. Then she said. That changes things. Soren watched her carefully. How? He asked. Ilaris met his gaze fully now. Because now, I'm not here because I have to be. That was the point. He knew it. She knew it. She looked down at the folder one last time. Then closed it firmly. Not with force. With decision. I understand what this is, she said. Soren didn't speak. This isn't control, she continued. It's a choice. Yes. That word came quietly. But it was clear. Ilaris held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she said something that shifted everything again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just simply. This time, it's my decision. Some things aren't meant to be controlled, they're meant to be understood. Nothing changed all at once. There was no sudden shift in the atmosphere. No dramatic moment that marked the beginning of something new. The space remained the same. The city outside moved as it always did. But something had settled. Not tension. Not uncertainty. Something quieter. Clear. Soren stood near the window, his posture relaxed but his attention steady. The lights of Velmora stretched out below, distant and constant. From this height, everything looked simple. But he knew better. Things were never simple. Not when choices were involved. Behind him, Ilaris moved through the room. Not cautiously. Not carefully. Naturally. That was the difference. Before, every step she took had been measured. Every movement deliberate. Now, there was still awareness in the way she carried herself, but it no longer created distance. She wasn't analyzing the space anymore. She existed in it. Soren noticed. Of course he did. He noticed the way she no longer paused before sitting down. The way she didn't position herself near exits every time she entered a room. The way her attention shifted naturally instead of constantly tracking everything. She hadn't lost awareness. She had simply chosen where to place it. That choice mattered. Ilaris stopped near the table, her hand resting lightly against the surface. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Silence had become something else between them. Not empty. Not tense. Understood. Soren turned slightly, his gaze settling on her. You stayed, he said. It wasn't a question. Ilaris looked at him, calm as always. Yes. No hesitation. No explanation. Just certainty. Soren held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. That was enough. There were no conditions. No agreements. No expectations placed between them. What remained wasn't built on necessity. It was built on decision. Ilaris walked closer, stopping at a distance that no longer felt measured. It felt natural. You changed the structure, she said. Soren's expression remained steady. Yes. You removed control. I adjusted it. That was more accurate. Ilaris nodded slightly. That's why this works, she said. Soren studied her for a moment. Explain. Ilaris didn't rush her answer. Because control doesn't disappear, she said. It shifts. Soren remained silent, letting her continue. It becomes something else, she added. Something shared. That idea settled into the space between them. Not as a theory. As something real. Soren had built everything around control, precision, structure. But this was different. You're not trying to leave, he said. Ilaris shook her head slightly. No. Not even now. No. Another pause. Then she added, I don't need to. That wasn't dependence. That wasn't hesitation. That was clarity. Soren understood that. And because he understood it, he didn't question it. The city outside continued moving unchanged. But inside the balance had shifted. Not dramatically. Not forcefully. Quietly. Ilaris moved toward the window, standing beside him. Not in the position she had taken before. Not watching for exits. Not analyzing reflections. Just standing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence carried everything it needed to. Some connections aren't built in moments of intensity, they're built in the space where nothing needs to be forced. Soren glanced at her briefly. You understood the risk, he said. Yes. And you stayed anyway. Yes. That word carried more meaning now than it had before. Because now it wasn't tied to circumstance. It was tied to choice. Ilaris looked out over the city, her expression calm. People think staying means accepting something, she said. Soren listened. But sometimes, she continued, it means deciding something. That distinction mattered. Soren turned his attention back to the view, his posture steady. Everything had changed. Not because of power. Not because of control. Because of understanding. There were still unknowns. Still things that hadn't been fully explained. Still pieces that would take time. But those weren't immediate problems. They were part of something larger. Something ongoing. What mattered now was simple. Clear. They were no longer standing on opposite sides of the situation. They were standing within it. Together. Ilaris shifted slightly, her presence no longer distant, no longer measured. Just present. Soren exhaled slowly, his voice low but steady. This wasn't part of the plan. Ilaris glanced at him. No. A brief pause. Then, it's better. Soren didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because for the first time since this began, there was nothing left to control in that moment. Only something to maintain. The silence returned again. But this time, it wasn't something waiting to be filled. It was something complete. Some bonds aren't built by control, but by the moment someone finally chooses to stay. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting videos.